The next poem we're going to look at is The Man He Killed by Thomas Hardy, written in 1902. A quick reminder of the context that you can talk about with this poem. So, as I said, it was written by Thomas Hardy in 1902 and is set just after the Boer War, which was a conflict between South Africa and Great Britain between 1898 and 1902. Thomas Hardy was well known for feeling that the war was very unjust. He was accused of pro-Boer loyalty, so supporting the South Africans against England. He did go and fight in the war, and so he has first-hand experiences of this conflict. The poem is quite a short one. It's got a very regular rhyme scheme at the opening and at the ending, but the use of caesura and enjambment breaks that down in the middle of the poem. It goes as this. The Man He Killed, 1902, by Thomas Hardy. Had he and I but met by some old ancient inn, we should have sat us down to wet right many a nipperkin. But ranged as infantry and staring face to face, I shot at him as he at me, and killed him in his place. I shot him dead because he was my foe. Just so my foe, of course he was. That's clear enough, although he thought he'd list perhaps offhand, like just as I was out of work, had sold his traps, no other reason why. Yes, quaint and curious war is. You shoot a fellow down, you'd treat if met where any bar is, or help to half a crown. So you can pause the poem and have a look at some of the annotations that we made in class, but things that you might want to talk about in the exam. Hardy quickly establishes a sense of kind of wonder and curiosity in the opening stanza. The auxiliary verb had and the modal verb should illustrate the speaker is reflecting on a hypothetical experience. He's imagining that if this man that he is fighting in the Boer War on the battlefield, if he'd met him at home and in a rural setting, or back in kind of normal life, that he and this other soldier wouldn't have an issue. They could be friends, they would go to the pub, they'd have a pint, they'd sit down and share stories of their lives. However, as the poem develops, the second stanza opens with the coordinating conjunction but, which suggests a change in Volta, the transition between the hypothetical past and what could have been, and the reality of the situation. That second stanza, as the men are staring face to face, shows that then Hardy, or the speaker of the poem, shot at him as he at me. So it shows the danger and really the kind of the luck. Whoever gets shot and killed in this, it's not down to necessarily skill or who they are, it is just the situation that they're in. The poem's tone of kind of confusion, anger, resentment, reflection is really amplified in this third and start of the fourth poem. The third stanza opens with the verb shot again to amplify the horror of what he's done and illustrates him grappling, so sort of struggling and trying to work out the reasons behind this. So he says, I shot him dead because he was my foe. Just so, my foe, of course he was. That's clear enough. So he's trying to reassure himself that the man that he's killed was his enemy. Of course he was, that's the reason why he's killed him. That's what he's been told. That's the government's message, that these people are our enemy, and that's why we're at war with them. But the caesura in that final line creates the enjambment with the although, and means that the third stanza ends with although, which suggests that there is reflection, there's an alternative interpretation to this, and really shows that the speaker of the poem is aware of the psychological impact. It sort of is left hanging there before he moves to the fourth and final stanza. The final line of the fourth stanza, no other reason why, is coupled with the idea of war as quaint and curious, which really Hardy is emphasising the futility of the conflict and really reflects his anti-war feelings. The circular narrative, so the fact that it ends with you'd shoot a fellow down, you'd treat if met where any bar is, or help to half a crown, links back to that idea of had he and I but met by some old ancient inn, and kind of humanizes these men. These are normal men. These are men that you can see in any walk of life. And this idea that they've been taken from a situation where really they could have been friends and they could have had sort of interesting conversations and stories and got to know each other. But they're not. They're ranged as infantry on a battle that neither of them probably actually believe in. And so this kind of humanization of the men really does show the stupidity and devastating consequences of human conflict. It's an interesting poem. There's lots and lots of things that you can pick out in terms of the punctuation. There's exclamatives, there's parenthesis, there is repetition. There's plenty of ideas here. It's quite short. Like I said at the start, you've got that regular rhyme, that regular meter, which gives you lots of things to get stuck into, especially when you're thinking about those comparisons with other poems. Some of those other poems that you could link The Man He Killed to: Exposure, with the exploitation of the soldiers and man's vulnerability, the unjustness of war. You've got Destruction of Sennacherib, so that idea of unnecessary death in the pursuit of glory, war, conflict. You've got What Were They Like, so the damage to populations, the unfairness, the unjustness of war, how it affects people, how actually, the people that are affected aren't necessarily always the soldiers that are fighting in the war. Or you could go something a little bit more modern. So you could look at something like Poppies, with that effects of war and that kind of psychological trauma on those people who are experiencing conflict, they're experiencing death, and how that resonates and kind of leaves them reflecting on the loss that war creates. So lots to talk about. A lovely short poem, so a nice one to remember.